Good afternoon and welcome to Vietnam Rising, Inside the China Market, our webinar today. I'm David Johnson, CEO of Delivering Asia Communications, and I'm your moderator today. COVID-19 has devastated the world of travel and tourism. But today, we want to focus on the positives. And what a remarkable story of resilience and resolve we're seeing in Vietnam. It's a country long in the shadow of its neighbor Thailand, and it's leading the recovery of the tourism industry in Southeast Asia. Emerging first from COVID, strong, buoyant, and ready for the future. So today we're here to find out more about this story and how it is likely to play out in the domestic market and the international market, led by China, who are waiting in the wings. So today I'm delighted to welcome our speakers, led by Ken Atkinson, founder of Grant Thornton Vietnam and vice chairman of the Vietnam Tourism Advisory Board. Michael Pirro, chief operating officer of Indochina Capital. David Keane, CEO of hospitality branding agency Quo. C9 Hotelworks managing director Bill Barnett, with whom we partnered to do the China-Vietnam Travel Sentiment Survey. And our own Delivering Asia Communications China director, Vanessa Zhu. Okay, just before we actually start off, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. So we're going to run for 45 minutes. There'll be presentations for about 25 minutes, 25 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A for 15 to 20 minutes after that. Please type your questions into the Q&A function below, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Those that we can't get to, please contact us separately. We will send the presentation to all the people who've registered. So it'll be the presentation and the recorded webinar will be sent right after the session. Okay, let's get going. Ken Atkinson, please set the scene for us and give us some perspective on Vietnam's growth as a tourism destination and share some views on the future. Ken, please.
Okay, thanks, David. I'd like to go back to 1990 because that was the year that I started my residence in Hanoi. And at that time, there were less than 200,000 foreign visitors to Vietnam. There were 3 international flights to Ho Chi Minh City from Bangkok. There were 2 to Hanoi from Bangkok. And if we wanted to travel outside of Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, we had to get special travel permits from the police. There was 1 international hotel, the famous Floating Hotel, which is currently residing in North Korea, if anybody wants to know. Average daily rate was over $200 a day for staying in a cabin with a toilet that sucked, if you get my point. Okay. 2011, I think I always view as a major milestone for Vietnam when we got to 6 million foreign visitors. And I say that because when I first came to Asia, I used to go to Thailand quite a lot. And in the mid-80s, Thailand actually hit that $6 million number, which I remember well. Coincided with the opening of the second terminal in Da Nang, which facilitated a big increase in the number of Chinese tourists coming into Vietnam, and the number of flights shot up to over 100 a week. In 2018, we hit 15 million foreign visitors, and 5 million of those were Chinese, and 3.5 million of those were Korean. So basically over 50%. Interesting to note that it took Thailand 15 years to go from 6 million to 15 million foreign visitors compared to the 7 years that it took Vietnam. In 2018, we had 15,600 3 to 5-star hotels, and the number of rooms was 353,000. Interestingly, Airbnb had reached 40,000 listings and continues to grow. 2019 foreign visitor arrivals reached 18.5 million, which was the record so far, and domestic travellers reached 85 million, which is actually a pretty fantastic number and one that a lot of people overlook. We've had a decline of 40% in the first 4 months of 2020, but that's masked by a record number of visitors in January and down to almost zero in April. Last week, we saw domestic travel resume. We saw increase in flights, interestingly allocated by the Civil Aviation Authority of Vietnam. And the government is preparing plans to support domestic travel. I think what we saw over the weekends, based on preliminary results, and Michael will probably have more to say on that, is that people were prepared to travel close to home, travel by their own transport, but there was a reluctance to get involved with airports and planes. So the further destinations didn't fare too well. Okay, that's the scene from me. So the key challenge seems to be the fear factor. The domestic travel to closer destinations to the major cities will probably help the smaller properties. And my big question is, how many of the small private hotels are actually going to reopen? The key to reviving the industry really has got to be international travel. And we're talking to the government at the moment as Tourism Advisory Board about creating travel bubbles between countries or destinations that have managed to contain community transmission. But we're unlikely to return to 2019 levels, I don't think, until 2022, unless we're able to start taking visitors from China by the third quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Excellent, great historical perspective and some views on the early baby steps regarding domestic recovery. Michael, if I can hand over to you now, please. I know you've got some market intelligence that you'd like to share on the right path to recovery. I'm just going to hand over to you. Michael Pirro, please. Michael, you need to unmute.
No, sorry, I'm saying I've been, thank you. I've been living in Vietnam for 15 years and seen a lot happen in that time, but this is definitely the most interesting time in Vietnam I've seen. So today I'll quickly take you through a snapshot of kind of where we were. Ken's done a good job of that, so I won't spend too much time. I'll talk about kind of where we are today and kind of our outlook on the recovery. Next slide, please. So before COVID, as Ken mentioned, please go to the next slide, Vietnam was on a great path. You know, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, you know, a very robust trade surplus on Vietnam standards, just under 10 billion. Vietnam became kind of the sweetheart of the region for foreign investment. We saw registered FDI up to 38 billion. Most of the 70% of that going into manufacturing. So we're seeing that shift from China to Vietnam. We've got this young dynamic population of about 100 million, 40% are under the age of 25. Really, they're out there spending, they're technologically savvy, they're really driving the economy. We're coming in just under the 20 million mark last year for international tourism. And then there's an amazing story of domestic tourism, you know, coming in at 85 million. So really the key kind of golden years for Vietnam tourism, as you can see here, have really been kind of over the last decade, with a particular focus over the last 5 years where we kind of saw things kind of growing at a compounded annual growth rate of about 20%. This is all being driven by international arrivals, low-cost carriers, and Vietnam has made an incredible commitment to infrastructure spend. They actually spend more on infrastructure than any of their Southeast Asian counterparts. So connectivity is also driving a lot of this growth in tourism. Next slide, please. So kind of where are we at today? How are we affected by the COVID virus? If you sit here today, we're looking at a painful decline in arrivals, so down 20% year over year. We're seeing occupancy rates dropping. This is I think fairly generous, saying 30%, in some cases more. We've seen 15% drop in room rates. We're seeing closure of F&B businesses. So, the impacts are severe. They can be felt, they're being felt in a very serious manner here. We're seeing some interesting things happen in terms of M&A groups now looking to merge. We're seeing creative approaches to management, etc. So the market is definitely in a state of change right now, and kind of how this all shakes out, it'll be interesting to see over the next over the next 6 to 12 months. Next slide. So now let's talk about the path to recovery. So Vietnam did obviously a superb job at managing the virus. The Economist actually just released a report saying that Vietnam is actually looking like it'll be the 12th strongest economy in the world post-virus. Or post-corona. So Vietnam has put itself in a superb position to make a strong rebound. And a recent survey actually shows that 80% of Vietnamese are actually positive about the future. So this actually helped reinstate a lot of confidence from the government into the people in how the situation has been managed. And there's definitely a sense of pride here in Vietnam that's very palatable here, that people feel that we came out of this very well, and that the future is still presents a lot of opportunity. So just looking back, April 23rd, we've started to see things open up, flights resuming, buses, public transportation, trains, all starting to resume schedules, albeit at much lower rates than before. The government is stepping in now, putting up about $2.5 billion into promoting, into supporting hospitality, tourism, F&B industry, unemployment. So we're seeing a very strong support from the government. It's very high on the agenda here today to get the economy back into shape. And we've seen some early indications. We just experienced the first holiday since the social distancing program has been lifted and flights have opened up. And early indications suggest that the Vietnamese market, they're keen to get back into their travel habits. We did see people traveling quite extensively over the holidays. I think the biggest change that we saw is people were looking to localize their travel habits, so they were choosing to drive to nearby locations. For example, close to Saigon here, Mui Ne, which is within driving distance, was full. Phu Quoc, which is a short flight away, where I spent the long weekend, was not so busy. So I think people will gradually go from driving to flying locally to flying regionally and then internationally. So what's driving all this growth in Vietnam? Spending power with robust GDP growth rate. People have more money in their pockets. We have this growing upwardly mobile middle class and rapid urbanization. Improved mobility with increased flights. We have new airlines opening up, budget airlines, increased infrastructure spend, and Vietnamese are generally have very much bought into the concept of holidays in a very big way. And it's, we're seeing considerably more spend of household spend being allocated to travel, which is very encouraging for the future. The government has a number of other initiatives, including the Vietnam Now campaign, where they're going to look to promote further tourism throughout the Asia Pacific. We're really going to be pushing business travel on a controlled basis. Obviously, we're going to propose if things such as visa incentives, other things, once the COVID situation is under control, to encourage guests to return to Vietnam. And overall, I think, if you look at China and South Korea, which are the two key feeder markets, it seems like their situations are going to come under control relatively quickly. So we should be able to bounce back, as globally the economy kind of deals with this. So kind of just to summarize here, as we look back, Vietnam has experienced incredibly rapid growth over the last decade in the tourism industry. The economy has been going strong. During Corona, unlike most countries, it's had an impact on the tourism market, but Vietnam has dealt with it in a very meaningful way, building up a lot of confidence in the country. And looking forward, we believe that the Vietnam tourism market is gonna recover quickly. It'll initially led by domestic tourism. People will stay close to home, and as we start to see international tourism come back, we think it'll be quite robust, as Vietnam is positioned both from an economic standpoint for business travel very strongly, and then also on the leisure side. So those are my remarks. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass you on to my other panelists now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That's excellent. Really, really insightful. Domestic travel certainly as the recovery driver in terms of the tourism industry. A remarkable story. But I think the question that needs to be asked too is that how are hotels, how is the industry going to reach those travelers? That's when I'd like to introduce us to David Keane, CEO of Quo. Could I hand over to you, David, to give us a few insights on that?
Thanks, David. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Bill. And great to be here. Yeah, I mean, I would never want to contradict Ken Atkinson, because he is the godfather of tourism in Vietnam. 85%, or at least 85% of all tourism in 2019 was domestic. There'll be no foreign tourism in the next several months, or hopefully less, but certainly in the forthcoming months. So all products, everyone in Vietnam has to react and has to create branding, or has to create definition, has to create a vision to attract the domestic tourist. They have to pivot. You have to imagine that your market is something different. The middle class, the Vietnamese middle class is burgeoning. The real estate market prior to the virus is and will continue to be buoyant, where affordable housing and everything above it is being driven significantly. Therefore, the key deduction, and Michael's referenced it, Ken's already referenced it, is that domestic tourism is going to be critical. So what I want to run you through in the next 2 or 3 minutes is just a quick understanding of how you need to be addressing that market. You need to pivot. You need to try and find a way through understanding what your own value proposition is, what your positioning is. Remember, there's massive supply now and very limited demand, or relatively limited demand over the next few months. And that demand is going to be ostensibly a domestic demand. Understand who it is that you're able to attract, understand what it is they're looking for, and create recommendations, experiences, packages, whatever it is to that market, and then form your messaging strategy. And we'll talk about communications in a moment. But this is your critical chance to stand apart. What is your brand? Who's attracted to it? Why are they attracted to it? Even if you're, and Ken referred to small small hotels that may or may not survive. They have their own positioning. They have their own ability to attract. You need to learn. You need to understand yourself. Take a good look inside yourself and look at what it is, what assets you have that will be attractive to the new market, and that's particularly, be it in business or in leisure, to the Vietnamese middle class, young Vietnamese burgeoning middle class. They're looking for experiences, they're looking for lifestyle, and they're looking for they're looking for a different type of hotel in terms of experience than you may have, and that's where you may be able to pivot. So once we understand who it is, look at what your competition is doing. I mean, it's all kind of basic stuff, but really look at what your competition are doing. Look how you can form distinction. Look quickly how you can shine in an incredibly crowded market. Change your purpose. If one thing the virus has taught us is that we need purpose. We need to have a reason for being. We need people, the market, the younger market are going to be looking, they're the ones who are in demand, they're the ones who are in control. They can choose, but they will be looking for products or brands that mean something, that have some sort of environmental connection, that have some sort of value connection, have something that talks and is meaning and has a narrative that speaks to them, and then form that narrative and as I said just before, drive packages, channels, or whatever to that market. What is happening operationally? I'm speaking to many hotels all over the world now. The ones that I know will come out of this virus the best are those that are going from first touch to last touch. And I don't mean touch physically, I mean first touch from the guest to last touch from the guest. What are the guests going to, how are they going to interact with the brand? How are they going to feel when they come into the brand? What changes do they need to make? Some brands are changing their housekeeping staff from wearing black to being unseen, to being red, to being seen. Whatever it is, what are you serving in terms of food? Every single moment. This is now your time to create guidelines and implications to make a massive change. Next slide. Form your messaging, be direct, be bold. I'm particularly bold, but be very bold. Try and create messaging which reflects who you are, both internally and externally. No, never has it been more important to form culture internally. Never has it been more important for your staff to understand what their values are, what the value is, the vision, the mission, and all the rest of it of your brand, and that they can talk to it and they believe in it. And then form that and bring them to share them, get them to share in social media and to take it live. Last slide. What tools are you using? Everything has to be social media. Don't spend money on advertising. It's a waste of money. Spend money possibly driving social media, driving it only in Vietnamese. Go into local channels. And if you're talking in China, go to WeChat and Weibo. If you're talking generally, use WhatsApp. Use Line. Use channels that your market is talking to. And as I say, only use digital advertising. Your website is your critical tool. Look at it, check it, make sure that it's optimized to the markets that you're talking to. Make sure it's up to date, make sure it's forming your distinction. Thank you very much, and sorry for going over time. Can't hear you, David. You're on mute. David, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, it's got a bit noisy here. Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you very much indeed for that. Everyone's got to go digital to communicate with certainly with the customers of the future post-COVID. I'm just going to hand over now to Bill Barnett. Bill Barnett's got a presentation focusing on the China-Vietnam Travel Sentiment Survey that he conducted in association with our office in Shanghai. Bill, please.
Hi, good afternoon, David. It's great to see the Godfather there, and certainly David Keane wearing a black T-shirt. Well done, Michael. You've shared my sentiment of it. I had a double espresso lunch, so we're going to get through this real quickly. The China-Vietnam survey. What we've done is we've gone to tertiary cities and first-tier cities in China, and really focused mainly on first-tier cities, and talked to people, qualified travelers, who are saying across the spectrum about is their appetite for the rest of this year. As David said before, here and now, who are the travelers going to be later in the year? And I think when we look at COVID-19, we're saying that, this is a baby learning to crawl. And what they do is, if a baby's crawling, they're going to say, first, let's go domestic. But the next steps are going to be those steps outside. And something from our research that we always see is that people now, when we're talking to travelers who want to say, will I travel abroad this year? They want to go to known destinations. They want to travel shorter distances. And this is what's interesting from this whole type of research. We've just finished these research findings late in April, so these are fresh. We've talked to over 1,000 people, in terms of that. And we tried to focus on saying, what was interesting is saying that almost half of the respondents say they want to travel abroad this year. That's a good thing, in terms of the actual sentiment. It means there's an appetite beyond domestic. Again, David's point was very clear for the next 3 months, but business plans go beyond 3 months. We've got to look at the rest of 2020 and say that, there's a lot of people there who have pent up demand for traveling. And interestingly, 45% were interested in traveling to Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam's been a first mover. And I think, the Vietnam story is it's really leading Southeast Asia right now in reopening travel. And that's probably an exciting time for everybody to see how, I know Michael Pirro went to Phuquoc on the weekend. You're seeing people move in that country already. So it's going to be, you know, it's a great guinea pig in terms of what's going to happen in the marketplace. You know, the majority of Vietnam travel budgets per person, again, $700 to $1,400 per trip. And one thing you have to remember about the China is the average length of stay is much shorter than Europeans or the legacy markets. You know, we're looking at average length of stay many times because of door-to-door travel time of 2.5 days, you know, and longer. So that's a good thing in terms of budgets. What's another interesting finding was in terms of the destinations. Again, there's not surprises here, but that's also understanding the fear factor. You know, I go back to, they're saying nothing like this ever happened. Go back to 9/11 and, you know, America made the rest of the world take their shoes off, you know, in terms of that 20 years later, you still take your shoes off in some places. So we can learn from the protocols and what makes people feel safe. It's interesting for me, what happens after COVID-19? Are we gonna be wearing masks 20 years from now? And then of course we have the traditional periods for China, which is August. We have the national holidays coming in, and towards the end of the year going into Chinese New Year. Are these patterns gonna continue, which we think they will? Cycles are prolific, and I think we can't say what is the new normal, because there will be cyclical returns later this year to travel. And you know, for hoteliers, you can't just say you're gonna open the doors and they will come. There are cycles to that, so I think that's important. Again, when we're talking about which month would they plan overseas traveler, we see October, national holidays, but also what's interesting here is the impact of how many people would like to travel, but haven't set a time they want to travel. This means they can be influenced. I think the mistake would be to look at this survey and say, this is all of Chinese, the mass market. These are the early adopters. These are the people who want to travel in the market. And the ability to go digitally, as David said, is get to those people now, because they still don't know when they want to come. So you can influence them and they can travel. They're not planning a holiday for 2021. They're open to when they could travel. So when the opportunity and the quarantines are solved, these are the travelers you want to attract digitally. And I think that's very important. Again, we've seen how the international and Chinese tourist arrivals exist. And you know, for us, it's just a natural, because it's short travel distance. I think with the low-cost Chinese airlines and certainly the Vietnamese airlines going into China, these can react faster than legacy airlines. They can turn on the stream of flights coming in much faster, and they'll be much more reacting to demand. You know, as more demand comes, a legacy carrier takes 3, 6, 9 months to gear up demand, while the low-cost carriers can fly in a few months' notice. That's important to understand how prolific China is to Vietnam. I think another thing in terms of traveling to locations, and again, there's not surprises here, which is interesting, because we go back before, you know, a couple of years ago, we're talking about adventuresome, we're talking about other experiential tourism, but people as their first trip abroad, like a baby, when you first learn to run, you're not going to run down the street, you're going to run to the neighbor next door. And China's the neighbor next door in this case, but people want to go where they know and what brand names they hear. You know, in our experience, after SARS, after other financial issues throughout and those type of crises, people will be attracted to brands, and destinations are brands as well as hotel brands. But it's important that you see the bigger destinations drawing the demand, and I think that certainly is important. You know, again, there are some findings here which are interesting, because we look at sightseeing. Of course, we know how the Chinese like to do that. We know with eating, of course, but nature. You know, the Chinese were cooped up after the COVID crisis. They want to see natural experiences, and that's a good finding from this, because everybody says the Chinese just want to go on group tours and go in a group going and eating and shopping, but this clearly shows a point that they want that natural atmosphere as well. In terms of Vietnamese airlines, it was kind of interesting how much they know about Vietnam Airlines. You know, they understand the flag carrier, but there's still not a lot known about these type of brands. So there's a bit of work to do for Vietnam in terms of getting their brands known on the mainland, and certainly that's something interesting. This, of course, is probably one of our most interesting thing, because independent people are opting to travel independently or in smaller groups. They're saying we don't want to go into mass tourism. These are the early adopters, and we may be sitting here a year from now and saying when mass tourism comes back in 2021 and 2022, it may be different, but the people who want to travel now want to be on a more exclusive basis, which is good, because if you're promoting digitally, that's where you're going to be able to promote to. And of course, there's no surprise, and we've seen this pretty consistent across all of our work in China, talking about Thailand, talking about other countries, is there's demand at the top and there's demand at the bottom. You know, certainly for budget and economy as well as luxury. You know, in terms of luxury, there's a lot of preference when we talk to people saying they want to be maybe more exclusive or kept away from larger groups. And also the budget and economy traveler is the more adventuresome 20 to 29-year-old. I think when we keep on going in terms of seeing what the other demand will be, Certainly our research is pointing out that what is your preferred channel to book hotels? I think this is interesting because we know that C-Trip dominates the standpoint. But if we take the next tier, you know, the WeChat, the Fliggies, the hotel websites, almost 40% are opting and saying we would go to these sources, which means you can go to the markets quickly through WeChat, through social media standards, through hotel websites, actually reach these customers who are saying we want to travel this year. And that was, OTAs are not going to be finished from the COVID-19 crisis. I don't believe that. OTAs are svelte, they're faster than hotel companies. They'll still be a factor, but we are seeing an increasing thing through social network channels. Certainly in terms of our complexity of who these people are, mostly company employees. A company employee could be a managing director of a company, or it could be a lower level manager or supervisor, but these are the type of people who are going to be traveling. And kind of ramping into age distribution. Again, we see the 20 to 29, 30 to 39. These are the travelers. These are the first responders who are coming back to the markets. And again, there's a good gender distribution there as well. And I think in terms of the budget per trip, this was interesting for us because it's a reasonable spend. You know, something that we don't believe is when people come back COVID-19, hotels don't need to pull down rates. They can package. They can package all-inclusive offers, everything, which don't do damage to hotel rates. You know, bottom line, we're going to wrap up here, is certainly the air carriers are reopening domestic flights. So they're ahead of Asia. You know, Vietnam is certainly leading the pack and a prime mover in that. And we think that's good. You know, in terms of exchange rates, you know, the Chinese currency certainly is okay against the dong. Last year's third and fourth quarter, Lamais against, you know, the trade issues with the US. So they have a higher currency spending power. Geopolitical issues between China, certainly in some Western countries, it makes you see, are the Chinese necessarily going to want to travel to North America the rest of this year or other destinations? There's more risk in that. So we see intra-Asia travel certainly as a way. And again, post-crisis fear factor over spending too long on airplanes. You know, for us, the 2020 story is going to be short haul. It's going to be interregional. It's going to be growing from domestic, but there is that baby steps of travel going ahead. So I think that's kind of our consensus. That wraps up our approach. David?
Thanks, Bill. So the post-COVID traveler, younger, more independent, more experience-driven than before. I mean, we can see already on the streets of Shanghai. So on May Day, there were 1 million people on the Bund. They're all wearing masks, but there were 1 million people outside on the Bund. I mean, this is really showing a change. Disneyland is opening mid-May. So this is really showing a change, certainly in domestic travel in Vietnam, in China, and people wanting to really get out into the market. But what's also really interesting from your findings, Bill, is that the traveler is now, you know, a lot younger. And so how do we reach that new traveler? You know, maybe it's not the same channels that we used to before. So I'd like to introduce and bring Vanessa Zhu from our office in Shanghai on, just to give us a few insights into the post-COVID traveler, should we call them, and the new tools to reach them. Vanessa, please.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I would like to discuss about how to reach about Chinese customer via some digital tools. So COVID definitely changed about people's lifestyle a lot. So we've been experiencing about 2 months quarantine time. So people stay at home, they do nothing. All what they could do is use mobile phone as a very important entertainment tools to entertain themselves, to kill time. So here we have some new information I would like to share to you. First one is Fliggy. Fliggy actually is one of the products belongs to Taobao. And Taobao is one of the major product from Alibaba. So Fliggy is the tourism product session from Taobao. So right now they have over 270 million registered users, and 52% of them actually is under 30. And I will say, if C-Trip is a omni-store shop for traveling tours, for traveling or trips, then Fliggy is more like a department store for traveling business. So it's mainly focused on independent traveler FIT, and each hotel or can open their own online store on Fliggy. So it's more direct method from the hotel the traveling service to the ending user, and it's owned by Alibaba. And then we move to Alipay. So Alipay, probably I would say every single Chinese, if they have a smartphone, they have an Alipay. And it's the biggest international payment system for Chinese travelers. So right now, the new method for young people is they carry cards, but they also carrying phones. So whenever they go, they use the Alipay, scan the QR code, boom, then the payment results. So with this, the payment is more direct, and the purchase is also more direct. And the money will goes to the hotel directly, bypass all those kind of OTA. And the next one actually is the TikTok. TikTok is the biggest, fastest growing entertainment apps right now. TikTok in China, we call them Douyin. So it's growing really fast. Right now, it's first established 3 years ago. Now we have daily active user, actually it's over 400 millions. So it contains music and any video clips. It actually taking a lot of efforts during the COVID because people stay at home and then just swapping all those kind of videos. And then because for so many people is using TikTok, even the China government use TikTok, use Douyin actually to deliver messages. So right now, Douyin actually become one of the major platforms besides Weibo, besides WeChat, besides the Little Red Book, those kind of normal common way we use, become one of the major channel for people to gain information. This is a very big phenomenon right now because it's a new habit. And the most important and interesting part is like Douyin actually also owned by Alibaba. So it's kind of like with Fliggy, Douyin, and Alipay. It's kind of an ecosystem right now.
Thank you, Vanessa. The new ecosystem to be able to access the certainly the under 30 heavily digitally focused independent traveler. That's great. TikTok, the rise of TikTok has just been extraordinary. I mean, I was reading the other day that it's the second most downloaded app in the world. 800 million downloads after WhatsApp. That's great. We've had a lot of questions. I just want to just start getting to some of them. The first one actually is for you, please, Bill. We've got a question here, which wants to compare Thailand with Vietnam. Which one's going to bounce back first, and why?
I think that certainly I'm sitting in Thailand at the moment, so I'm in the hot seat. But I think first mover advantage. I mean, Thailand has yet to be. We're seeing a first mover advantage of Vietnam in terms of moving domestic travelers around here. As I said, Michael went to Phu Quoc on the weekend. There's still a lot of uncertainty. Places like Phuket, where I said today is I'm not allowed to travel by air to Bangkok until the middle of the month. So first mover advantage. I think we'll see some of the first actions certainly in Vietnam. I think Thailand will follow because again, it's going to be intra-Asian. And we talked about this travel bubbles between Australia and New Zealand. We see this next with Singapore talking already about creating an ASEAN-wide. So we're going to see neighbors coming up. So I think there's going to be a knock-on effect throughout Asia. So Thailand's going to be a beneficiary. Malaysia's going to be a beneficiary. Singapore eventually as well. So it's going to be an ASEAN effect as well. So I think everybody will move. But Vietnam right now has the pole position.
Thanks, Bill. Michael, that certainly plays into what you were talking about earlier and the narrative of the domestic traveler. But what makes you so confident? What makes you so confident they will return? And at what speed will they return? Another question that's just come in.
So in terms of confidence that I believe the domestic market will rebound, I think generally, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the sentiment here, the fear factor that was discussed in one of the early presentations is very low. As I mentioned, 80% of Vietnamese are positive about life and their outlook right now. And I think generally people feel safe in the country right now. They feel like the situation is under control. And again, that young population is just, if you look at the population, again, 40% under the age of 25. They're, extremely energetic, extremely mobile, and desire to keep confidence in the industry, and people are keen to get moving. So I guess it's anyone's guess, but what I'm seeing on the ground here, the early indications are that people are, we had the long weekend. There were some front runners like myself, the risk takers that went out and took the first flight. I came back healthy. I'm passing on that story, and I can just feel it every day. The confidence is growing and growing. So I think as we enter the summer months, you're going to see a very big pickup.
Thank you. Something for Ken here. Hotels in Vietnam, the tourism industry in general, what can be done more actually on a product level to help drive the travelers of confidence?
So I think it is a confidence question, and therefore coming out with a protocol and a certification for hotels of minimum best practice to ensure that if there happens to be a case that minimize transmission possibilities, and then the promotion from the government. And as Michael said, I think we've had it very easy here compared to most other countries in the sense that we've had no fatalities. We've only had one new case in the last 18-20 days, which was somebody that was already in quarantine. So 271 cases is nothing when we compare to other people. So there is that confidence factor that we need to build on. But I think, yeah, having a protocol and a set of things that hotels have to be compliant with, and they're held to account if they're not, will give people the confidence to travel. I think also the number of resorts with villas where people can go as a family and be independent and not be having to mix or they're able to social distance will also be a factor.
Okay, thanks. I've actually got another one for you here, Ken, and it's a question about reciprocal bubble travel between countries. It's quite a topical conversation on the Q&A. How feasible is it?
I think it is feasible, and I think that's the way we're going to start. I don't think we're just going to open the borders to every country in the region on an ASEAN, if you like, wide basis. That we will be looking closely at whether they've managed to contain community spread before they allow people to travel into Vietnam. And then, of course, there's the question of transit. So if we were to open up, say, with Shanghai, then how do we control the fact, how do we control that the number of visitors coming in are all from Shanghai and they're not going from Wuhan to Shanghai first? But that's another story.
Right. It's an interesting one. Vanessa, what about the quarantine situation? Is there any domestic quarantine intra-cities in China still? Or if Chinese travel out, there's no restriction currently to travel out. Is there a quarantine coming back? Can you just give us an update there?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I have to say that the situation right now is getting better and better. Each province and each municipal has their own rule. Shanghai right now, there's a 0 case for a long time, as you can tell. Like on 11th of May, the whole Disneyland will be reopened. And in Beijing, 2 weeks ago, for domestic travel to Beijing has to be quarantined for 2 weeks. But just after the May holiday, right now this rules has been canceled. So people just need to go to Beijing without any quarantine time. And also, the city healthy degree has been lower from grade 1 to grade 2, which means more loosened. And the news say that in 2 weeks, if the situation is keep going better, then people can stop wearing masks in the public.
Okay, that's great. Okay, the $1 million question. Who am I going to send this to? I think it's going to go to David Keane. When will the market start traveling again? I know you talked in terms of 2 or 3 months. I know domestic's coming first. And how quick will that move? And when will the regional market start traveling again?
I think it's all up to quarantine, isn't it, David? I think we'll figure out how to cross borders. I think that there'll be safety in airplanes, but the question is quarantine, and it's all up to the paranoia of each government and whether they believe the source country that they're traveling from is so is so risky that there is some sort of quarantine. If we have to do 14 days, it doesn't matter where, in a hotel or wherever it is, it's going to be difficult. And I believe that that is not going to be, I want to be the optimist. I want to be the one that says, oh, yeah, it's going to start tomorrow. But I believe that the quarantine issue will probably, the cross-border quarantine issue will not be solved before September, October.
Okay, Bill, any insights from your survey?
I think we've got to get David some. We got to get David some happy pills today. I don't know. Maybe the black T-shirts. Maybe he's depressing me. Anyway, I think we understand that we don't have blinders on. We're not total idiots, right? I mean, we understand that what we're talking about is the future, and when we're planning business plans, everything else, we're seeing what the orderly process is, and we understand the protocol. We can learn from cycles. We can learn from 9/11s. We can learn from SARS a little bit, but certainly David's points are well taken, and in terms of that. But again, it's the baby steps again, and when when we're planning for Q3 and Q4, we know there'll be demand. I think that's what we're talking about today. But you don't start a marketing plan on the day that things are getting better. You have to plan ahead. And how are you going to influence these travelers in October, November, December, and going into those other months as well? The expectation is, 85 million certainly is a big number in terms of domestic tourism. China, again, in terms of such a significant number. Fish where the fish are. I think the point here is, segment your marketing, segment your process, and understand who these guys are, because your Chinese traveler of 2020 may not be your Chinese traveler 2021 and 22. But I think what we always learn is it's not a 365 marketing plan. Business has to be reevaluated every day. And that's why we like the digital search and seeing how things are changing every day and have your marketing approach to that. Personally, we think things will go a little quicker. I'm optimistic on that. And I think there's the reality, within Asia saying, cross-border and how that's going to be done at airports. Testing will be done at airports. The broader thing of creating travel certificates country to country, that's going to really stop travel from Europe and stop travel from North America, Australia for a while. So that's why the ASEAN protocol, we think, is more adaptable and they're able to work quicker. So that's kind of the thesis of our research on that one.
Thanks. Thanks there, Bill. Michael, quick one for you, please. Domestic travel, new destinations. I know we've talked a little bit about familiarity will be important. I've got a question here that won't people be more afraid of the traditional old destinations? They'll be seeking out new places to go.
So you want my recommendations on new places?
Yeah, are there any particular areas that you think are emerging will be attractive destinations?
The next wave, and I'll tell you now because I've already bought enough land there, but the Queen Yan, Fujian area is going to be the next hotspot. It's a Da Nang with better topography and a clean slate. So I think I'm kind of going long on that market, and I think it's got a lot of potential.
Fantastic. We're almost out of time. Just a couple of very, very quick ones. Vanessa, I've got a question here for you. So WeChat is no longer the most important channel to target the Chinese market. Yes or no?
No, WeChat is still important.
No.
WeChat is still the very important daily use communication tool. But it's just like people, because when people sitting at a home, they spend enough time. They spend their quarter on WeChat. They need the new thing to fit in the time slot. So that one is TikTok. So I will say, yeah, WeChat is still important.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you very much to our panelists. We've just been inundated with questions. We're going to reply to each of them. We have the email addresses, and thank you so much for that. And I'll discuss that with you offline. So I'd like to thank very much Ken Atkinson, Michael Pirro, David Keane, Bill Barnett, and Vanessa Ju. Thanks very much for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.